Hello trade pros. Did you know that no matter where you are in the world, there's an opportunity for you to trade a market on your own schedule? In today's video, I'm going to share with you the options that you have and how to choose the right product for your schedule and your trading goals.
Wherever you are, there's an opportunity to trade. All right. And the entire marketplace is structured into 4 main sessions, and you need to know them so you could pick your session and pick which product works. So here's how it works. Sydney in Australia, there's the Sydney market is the first one that opens on any given day. So on a Sunday at the beginning of a week, the futures start to trade for the Sydney market. All right. Well, when the Sydney open, these are all Eastern time frames. I'm going to work with you guys and we're going to convert it over to your time zone, but at 5 p.m. Eastern. Right now at the moment, it's 8 p.m. Eastern. All right. At 5 p.m. Eastern time, Sydney market opens and it closes at 2 a.m. the following morning. All right. So when you get home from work in the Eastern time zone, say 6, 7 p.m., the Sydney market's already open. You're not going to be trading the U.S. market, but you're trading the Sydney market. And well, now you might wonder, does that mean I have to buy stocks in Australia? And the answer to that is absolutely not. You don't have to buy stocks in Australia, but you're trading with the traders in Australia. All right, you're trading with that session. And one of the opportunities in the Sydney market, the biggest opportunity, is to trade currencies, and that currency pair is Australian dollar and the US dollar. All right, and fortunately enough, as a futures trader, if you've been trained on it, anyone here in the elite package has access to both. They have access to futures, they have access to the options education, and we give you all the tools to develop a strategy to test out and trade with. All right, well, you could trade the Australian dollar futures, AU6, and you could apply the same order flow concepts. You could apply your filters, your footprint charts, everything we teach you to the Australian dollar futures, the AU6. Now, you can't go into the Sydney session expecting to see New York type volatility. However, nobody said that the best thing is going to be available when you're around, but you don't need the best thing. All right? Do you need a Ferrari to go fast and have fun on a track? No, you don't. You could do it with a Mustang, a value-driven sports car, and you'll have just as much fun. All right. You need to know what to expect and what to look for. So the Australian dollar and US dollar pair is very big in Sydney. And fortunately enough, about 2 hours later, another market opens and starts to get a little bit more liquid. This is the Tokyo market out of Japan. Tokyo's got a lot of different companies that trade on the exchange. It opens at 7 p.m. Eastern time. So for those of you that are based out west, for the California traders and the West Coast traders, this ends up being pretty relevant because now it's 4 p.m. your time and you're probably just wrapping up work and the session is just getting started. And the good news in Tokyo is you have a little bit more capability and potential of what you could trade on this Tokyo time frame. It starts at 7 p.m. and it ends at 4 a.m. All right, and what you can trade in the currency market is the US dollar and Japanese yen. All right, and one of the best things that you could trade in the Tokyo market is Australian dollar versus the Japanese yen. Why? Well, Tokyo is Japan, all right, their currency is the yen, and Sydney is Australia, and their currency is Australian dollar. So if you just combine those two, AUD Jap yen, you have AUD Japanese yen. And during the Japanese session, one of the more active currencies pairs that you could trade is the JY6. The JY6 is futures for the Japanese yen currencies. All right, and the JY6 is the code in the CQG terminal in Market Delta. All right, so if you're using Market Delta, write down the code JY6. That's just the Japanese yen futures. If you're using another platform, this is called the more traditional nature 6J. All right, this is the 6A for the Australian dollar. If you're using another platform, the 6C is the Canadian, 6E is the Euro futures. So the CQG terminal has the 3-letter structure, other ones have the 2. All right, so you can trade these pairs. Did you guys know about this? Are you learning stuff so far? Another thing you could trade in Tokyo is equities. A lot of people don't know this. You could trade the S&P 500 contract, the ES on CQG. It's called EP. All right, you could trade the US S&P 500 equities market. Now you can't expect to get 30, 40 point range moves, but you get about half in the Tokyo session. So it starts to move, you get about 3 to 6 points, which is more than enough for you to earn a living out of, to earn a secondary wage, secondary income. Today I made about 3 points and I made my daily profit target and some money on oil as well, which oil, by the way, is another market you could trade in Tokyo. Okay, and those futures are CL. So what I'm here to tell you is, and I get this question very often, can I trade at any time during the day? The answer is yes, you can. And then the next question is, all right, great. So then I just could trade the ES, and the answer is no. You unfortunately cannot trade the same product at any time and expect to have the best opportunities. But there are products at any time of the 24-hour trading cycle that you could select that'll make sense for you. For the Sydney session to the Tokyo, I wouldn't trade too much because guess what? 5 to 7 p.m. usually the Globex futures don't open until 6. All right, S&P doesn't open for a trade until 6 p.m. in between these two. So you could trade the S&P starting 6 p.m. to about 7 p.m. That first hour is when things start to move, and then onwards to the end of the entire evening. You could use the same order flow analytics and tools, and we'll talk about that. You could also trade oil, and you could trade the Japanese yen. Now let's move in. This is pretty much your trader, your after work trader in the Eastern time zone, and now we're starting to get into the Western time zone in the United States. All right, now let's get into the London session. Anyone halfway across the world is going to start to get interested in this stuff in the London session. Anyone who works, anyone who's up at 3 in the morning and likes to be up at 3 in the morning Eastern for whatever reason, whether they have some kind of job responsibilities or that's just how it is, or they like to work late or they can't sleep or whatever it is, you have the London session. Anyone out in London will trade the session on a daily basis because that's what they have. Because otherwise, when they're up and trading, we're asleep, right? So this starts to transition off to the other side of the market. So if you're outside the US, you're outside of Canada, London starts to get attractive for you. If you're anywhere in Asia, if you're anywhere in Australia, if you're anywhere in Europe, London starts to make a little bit more sense. It opens at 3 in the morning Eastern and goes to 12 p.m. Here's the good news. London is probably one of the most liquid markets worldwide, and it can at times be more liquid than the United States depending on the product. Here's what you need to trade in the London session. You don't need to trade everything. You just need to trade the things that make sense. The pound futures, the GBP, huge, massive moves, big volume, big volatility, big opportunity. Any currency will move mostly in the London session. In general, London moves currencies and metals markets. All right, remember that. London moves currencies and metal markets. Most equity futures are driven on the New York session, which we'll talk about in a second. All right, so the pound futures, which are BP6 or 6B on some platforms, provide a lot of opportunity for you to trade, and you can apply all the order flow tools that we teach you in the day trader course onto these futures. Commissions are cheap. They have quite a bit of a moving range. They're tradable. If you manage your risk, you can make full-time income. You could make more than your regular 9-to-5 job trading 5 to 9. Not 9 to 5, but 5 to 9. The same could be said for Tokyo. But now you're starting to get a little bit more capabilities during the London session. So you could trade the European US dollar or the Euro futures, which is the 6E, or the EU6 on CQG. All right, so for London, I would say trade if you want to trade futures and not get into currencies. And I would advise you to stick with futures. Currency markets, you can't analyze. They're not transparent. I'd go EU6, BP6. Those are your two products. And on equities, you could trade the DAX if you're in London. Man, does the DAX move nice in those daily ranges. And then if you want to get some exposure, something you're more comfortable with, you could also trade the ES in the London session, but I'd put that as a secondary tool. Primary will be your currencies and metals. Secondary ES. Primary is currencies, gold, which is your metals, and the DAX futures. The DAX is really, really volatile. Tons of opportunity. All right. Thank you, Nick. I appreciate it. It seems like you guys are liking this so far. Phil says, is this where gaps are being formed in the U.S. markets? Yes. Yes, absolutely. So when you trade gold or any market, so for example, when you're trading gold specifically, there's an ETF called GLD. You guys have heard of it, right? And it's very easy to buy because it's kind of like a metal in the disguise of a stock. But it's lying to you because in that disguise, when the markets close at 5 p.m. or 4:30 p.m. rather in the US, that goes into after hours trading and there isn't much liquidity. So the movement of gold prices could be massive and your ETF is stuck. You have no way to manage your positions. That's why there's so many gaps up and down, because the majority of the moves happen in the London session, and it's like you're in a racetrack in a Ferrari and you start hitting the gas when you go into the pit, and when you get on the track you're driving slow. It's just a mismatched product. So that's why I push people, I don't push, but I recommend that they look at the gold futures. All right, so for London traders, BP6, EU6 on the CQG terminal, DD, which is the DAX, GC, which is gold. You got a lot of options. The bigger challenges for the traders who are more East and West Coast based, who have to kind of muddle into the Sydney and Tokyo session. And I can tell you this much. Yes, London's much better. All right. London is pretty much the New York equivalent session to anyone on the other side of the world, but Sydney and Tokyo's got a lot of opportunity. You don't need 30-point moves. You need to capture 3 points with higher probability. That's what you're after, and there's a lot of opportunity. So the last session here, Nick, that's a good question. Laurent, that's a perfect point. Laurent says natural gas is interesting during the London sessions because major weather forecasts come in between 2 and 4 a.m. Eastern. All right, that's a good point. So a lot of those forecasts will come in. Guess what's a good product? Natural gas. And then natural gas also cross correlates with CL, which is oil. Another one is RBOB, RB. So what I'm showing you guys is there's a lot of options. Thanks for that, Laurent. That's a good point. And we're going to talk about that in a moment. All right, and then the New York session has probably the most liquidity for futures, and it opens at 8 a.m. Technically, the New York session for pre-market trade, 9:30 is official U.S. Open, not the tennis tournament, and it trades until 4 p.m. And on the U.S. market, my gosh, you could trade whatever you want. There's liquidity. You could trade the euro, but my primary go-tos in the New York session are S&P 500, NASDAQ, Dow, and the Russell. And then I'll also look for commodities. I'll look for oil. I'll look for natural gas on inventory data. I'll trade the metals. You could trade anything. I've traded euro, the pound 6 futures, traded the yen futures. I trade any and everything in New York. Why? Because as you could see, there's a majority amount of moves and most amount of liquidity. Anyone in the United States side of the world is looking at this as their primary session. Anyone on the opposite side of the world is looking to connect to London. If they can't connect to one of the primary markets, then you're going to have to look for Sydney and Tokyo, and there's nothing wrong with it. You can do it. In fact, the next session together, I might actually sit down and trade with you guys for a couple hours on this session, and I'll explain to you how these markets work as well. Can you see order flow on the currency futures? Yes, absolutely, Liz. Absolutely. Let me show you if you guys want. I'll show you how to pull up. Do you want to see how to pull up the futures? Yeah, absolutely. This is meant to be interactive. Please ask questions as we go. This is your guys' session. We'll get through the material.